Dr. Rachel Watkins is an associate professor of anthropology at Penn, where she oversees the biological collection of the Penn Museum. Dr. Watkins has worked extensively with the W. Montague Cobb Anatomical Collection and the New York African Burial Ground in Lower Manhattan. She seeks to develop methods for supporting historic preservation and interpretation that is guided by descendant communities. So please give a big round of applause for our next great panel.
Hi, let me take a breath. Can you hear me? Are you there? There you go. Okay. Testing? Yes. So I am a biological anthropologist, and I came to biological anthropology as an undergraduate student at Howard University, where this real kind of interest and love of the study of human ancestral remains was cultivated. And that's because I had the opportunity to study skeletal remains in ways that connected communities and histories and different ways of knowing. So there was this way that I came to understand science as almost being magical, because there was a way to kind of extend scientific knowledge beyond empirical observation. And so when I graduated from Howard University, I kind of took that sense of magic and science and what it could be to graduate school with me. And that's a huge part of the reason why I wanted to go to graduate school, to continue the work of studying human skeletal remains in ways that connected histories and communities and different ways of knowing. But when I got there, I got the memo in multiple ways that my understanding of what science could be was not necessarily considered to be science at all. And I had a lot of very interesting conversations with well-meaning professors. And I guess I also have evidence by way of my grades on some of the papers that I did for their classes that my sense of what science could be was very much so at odds with what was considered to be scientific rigor at the time. And I was in graduate school, so I was expected to demonstrate that rigor, to get my degree, to get a job, and to also gain entree into networks that would allow me a certain degree of professional mobility. So, of course, being in my 20s and having this very strong belief in the way that I was taught to do science and practice science and understand what science could be, I took a really defensive stance and decided to label every bit of resistance that I encountered as foolishness. Right, and that was a very popular colloquial term at the time for stuff you didn't agree with or didn't make sense or what have you. So I kind of built up my defenses by determining everything that I'm hearing, everything that is questioning what I want to do is foolishness. And that got me pretty far, but eventually being a kind of feeling isolated, I got worn down. And I decided that I was going to leave graduate school. I didn't want to do it anymore. It was too much. And I figured I'd find another way to be who I am. When you make decisions like this, of course, you do not call, people like, I don't know, my dad, who's a chemist, to tell him that I was going to leave a doctoral program. Nor do you call any parent. I didn't call my mom either. So what do? You call your friends. Right? And so I made sure to have 7 or 8 phone calls that were full of, I know that's right, girl, you do what you need to do, yes, go, leave. And so once I had enough of those conversations and really boosted my confidence, then I called my mother. Notice I still didn't call my dad. So when I called my mother, I made a little chit chat, and then I finally said, so the reason why I'm calling you is to let you know that I'm leaving my doctoral program. I've had it, it's too much, and I think I can find another way to do whatever I'm gonna do. And my mother very uncharacteristically met me with silence. And when she did speak, she said, "Do you remember the Sunshine Family?" And I was like, what in the world? So for those of you who are not Gen X or who didn't raise Gen Xers, the Sunshine Family, was among the plethora of weird looking dolls that were at our disposal to play with in the 1970s, like crazy looking eyes and hair sticking up all over. But I love the Sunshine Family because that was the norm. So I said, yeah, and I'm thinking, where is this going? And she said, one day when you were like 4 or 5, I put you in the bathtub in a bubble bath, because I love bubble baths. And she said, and I put you in the tub with the Sunshine Family. And she said, and I stepped out for a little bit to do something, and when I came back, there were Sunshine Family heads and arms and legs and torsos floating all over the tub. And I should also say my mother's very religious, so you can imagine. So, and she said, and I just looked at that and I just slumped. And I said, Rachel, why did you do that to the Sunshine Family? And she said, you looked up at me and said, because I wanted to see what was on the inside. And so she said, so listen, you've been interested in skeletons, looking on the inside, whatever, just about your whole life. So please get off this phone and go back to school. So in other words, she called me on my foolishness, right? So I hung up the phone and got back to it. And so, among other things, here I am, a part of celebrating a program that very much so aligns with what I learned science could be, right? That science is not isolated from society. Science is having tough conversations and connecting communities and histories and different ways of knowing. And my here also includes being a professor and helping students who get to their point where they want to quit find their version of the tub with the arms, legs, and torsos floating around, where they can find the deep truth of what brought them to graduate school to study human skeletal remains in a way that connects histories and communities and different ways of knowing. And one of the things that I like to say to those students in those moments, for me as well as for them, to kind of cultivate gratitude for my journey and for theirs, and to let them know this is, all of this, it makes you who you are, and all of this is necessary, the easy and the hard stuff. I like to say to them, I have this quote from one of my favorite books called Palmares by Gail Jones. There's a character in that book who sums up life this way: everything in the world is part science, part magic, and part foolishness.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I got the PPO if you want to answer a couple of hard-hitting questions. I think, so one of my questions was just sort of how did you get drawn into this, which you've answered, and I think, I would really love to hear if there's like a moment from your work, because you've done so much really fascinating work with descendant communities, and I guess I'd be curious if there's any moment that stands out to you as being like, impactful in the sense of like you had this journey where you were like, I don't know if this is for me, I might get out of here. Is there a flip side of that where you were in your career and you were like, oh my God, like thank God I listened to mom and not my friends?
Yes, yeah. So going back to, it taking about 30 years for me to, get to be a part of intellectual communities where the way that I learned, what science could be is now more of the norm than not. I think that the, number of unfortunate crisis moments that have emerged over the past 5 years, including the uncovering of the remains of children who were killed in the MOVE bombing that were found at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, have been, those key touch points, because when that happened, our discipline was like, oh, we have to reckon with this. We need to think about how to do ethics differently, and we need to, what resources do we have? And they were like, oh yeah, that project, that New York African Burial Ground project. Let's start calling these people in. And it was a signal to me that this is the work I was built for. You know, it kind of connected, you know, that moment connected to the tub, which connected me back to here. Yeah.
Very good. You know, as someone, I was just delighted to connect with you, and I feel like when we first met, I laughed into a friend of mine. I feel like I was just talking to a mirror. This is crazy. Because, you know, a lot of this, you know, you sort of spend a lot of time in this world, and it can feel like you're the only one doing it, right? Or you're sort of the only one thinking about things in this way. So I felt really validated by our first conversation. I guess I would be really curious to hear from you. You know, what do you think some of the biggest next issues that we need to work through are? Like, where do you sort of see questions where even you with all your experience, you're like, I don't really know what the answer to this is yet?
Yeah, one that really stands out for me right now, one that I'm actually grappling with, has to do with my understanding and belief around ethical practices of curation and treatment of human ancestral remains and supporting research, because we very much so need people who are going to continue on this work after we retire, et cetera, because, you know, in much the same way that it took over 100 years to get us in the messes that we're in, it's probably going to take just as long. So we need to cultivate research and training to make sure that there are people who can continue the work after us. And, you know, I'm still kind of working through what that means. You know, what does research look like? You know, but in the longue durée, if you will, research toward return. There has to be time to train people. There has to be time to cultivate projects. And, you know, how do we involve the communities who need to be involved in that work? So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, well, we are excited to know.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.